You spent 30 years growing your hair, and the day you finally cut it short, you thought you'd feel free. But something in the mirror didn't sit right, and you couldn't name exactly what it was. A pixie cut at 60 plus should feel like the boldest, most confident move you've ever made for your hair. For some women it absolutely does. But for a lot of women, more than anyone in a salon will admit out loud, it quietly goes wrong in ways that are completely avoidable. Not because the cut is wrong for them, because of 7 specific mistakes that almost no one tells them about before they sit in that chair. I researched the worst style and beauty mistakes and the best fixes for women over 60, so you get real results fast. If you haven't already, hit subscribe. I cover this every week. 1. The chop that ages you. Why going too short backfires. Nobody warns you that the shortest pixie is actually the least forgiving one. That's not an opinion, it's geometry. The shorter the cut, the more exposed every facial contour becomes. And after 60, those contours have shifted. The temples are slightly hollower. The jaw is slightly softer. A pixie cut that left no room for adjustment used to work when those planes were sharper. Today, it can read as harsh in a way a longer cut simply wouldn't. Most women who sit down and ask for short and easy are imagining a sleek, polished cut that takes 5 minutes to style. What they sometimes walk out with is a blunt, ultra-short crop that sits flat at the crown and cuts off right at the ear. And suddenly the face is fully exposed in a way they weren't expecting. They don't know what went wrong. They just know they look older in the mirror than they did an hour ago. Here's what happened and why. A blunt ultra-short cut removes length everywhere simultaneously, crown, sides, nape, all at once. There's nothing left to create softness or transition. Every feature is front and center, fully lit, fully exposed. For a woman whose bone structure is angular and prominent, that might still work. For the majority of women over 60, it sharpens what's already a little sharper than it used to be. And the result lands as severe when it was meant to look clean. The fix is a graduated pixie with a soft taper. Keep it short. This is still a pixie, but leave more length at the crown than you think you need. 1 inch to 1.5 inches of length at the crown creates lift rather than flatness. The sides and back taper in, softly blended, not shaved or undercut. The side pieces just in front of the ears are kept longer, feathering slightly toward the cheekbones rather than being cut flush. Ask your stylist for a soft layered pixie with crown lift and tapered sides. Those exact words. The difference in how the face reads is immediate and measurable. The added crown height counterbalances the slightly softer jawline and creates a vertical visual line that lifts the whole face. The feathered side pieces draw the eye toward the cheekbones, not away from them. The soft taper at the nape closes off the silhouette cleanly instead of leaving it blunt. A woman who walks out with this cut looks deliberately styled, not like she asked for too little. She looks like she made a choice, not like the choice made her. What you're trading is one idea of short for a better one. The blunt crop feels shorter because it's more aggressive. The graduated pixie is actually shorter where it matters. It's tight and clean everywhere except the crown, where it intentionally holds height. It's a lighter feeling. It moves better. It doesn't need to be reset every time the wind touches it. That's mistake number 1. And it's the one that sets the whole cut up for success or failure before any other detail is touched. Because once the crown is right, everything else is an adjustment. But if the crown is wrong, no amount of fringe or color or product is going to fully save it. And speaking of fringe, the zone right above your eyes is where the second biggest mistake lives. And most women have no idea how much that 1 inch of hair is costing them. 2. The fringe zone. Why getting this wrong exposes everything. There is a 1 inch strip of hair that controls more of how your face reads than any other part of your pixie cut. It's the fringe line. What sits across your forehead, whether you have it or not. And it is the single most age-sensitive zone of the entire cut. Get it right and the face lifts. Get it wrong, or skip it entirely, and you've just left the most visible part of your face completely unframed. A lot of women over 60 go fringe-free on a pixie, because it sounds cleaner. Less maintenance. More modern. But here's what actually happens. The forehead becomes a full, uninterrupted horizontal plane, exposed from hairline to brow. Any lines on the forehead. And by 60, there are lines and there's nothing wrong with that. are now center stage with no visual break and nothing drawing the eye toward the lower face instead. The forehead reads longer. The whole face reads longer. And then there's the other side of the mistake, the fringe that's too short. A blunt, cropped fringe cut straight across above the brow. The kind that lands halfway up the forehead. Sits like a hard horizontal line across the face. It draws the eye immediately to whatever is directly below it. The brow bone, the eye socket, the upper eyelids, which by 60 may have softened slightly. A hard horizontal line in the wrong place emphasizes those features rather than framing them. The fix is a soft side-swept curtain fringe. Not a wispy fringe, not a full heavy fringe, a curtain fringe. It starts at the hairline on one side, sweeps diagonally across the forehead, and finishes level with or just touching the brow on the other side. The ends are point cut, meaning the scissors cut into the ends at an angle rather than straight across, which removes the hard horizontal line and creates a soft, feathered finish instead. Ask your stylist for a side-swept curtain fringe, point cut ends, grazing the brow on the longer side. What the curtain fringe does to the face is almost architectural. The diagonal line it creates across the forehead breaks the horizontal plane. And breaking that plane shortens the perceived length of the forehead immediately. The eye follows the diagonal downward, toward the cheekbones and the eyes themselves, which is exactly where you want attention. The brow is softly framed rather than fully exposed. And because the ends are feathered rather than blunt, the fringe sits as part of the cut rather than sitting on top of it. Women who've made this change consistently say the same thing. They thought fringe would age them, and it did the opposite. The right fringe on a pixie for a woman over 60 doesn't read as trying to look young. It reads as someone who understands her face and made a deliberate choice for it. One more thing about fringe that nobody tells you until they're in the chair. The styling direction matters as much as the cut. A curtain fringe that's dried straight down or diffused in place reads flat and heavy. It needs to be dried with a round brush or fingers pulling the longer side in its sweep direction, across not down, to hold the diagonal shape. Once you get that into your morning routine, the whole fringe thing takes about 45 seconds, and it keeps its shape all day. The fringe and the crown work together. Get both right and you've got a cut that does most of the lifting on its own. But there's a third zone on this cut that almost every woman completely forgets to think about, and it's the one stylists check first when they're sizing up a cut's age. It's at the back. And if you haven't been paying attention to it, your cut has been quietly unraveling right where you can't see it. 3. The detail that ages everything. What's happening at your nape? Stylists have a habit that most clients never notice. When a woman sits down in the chair, especially a woman who's had a pixie for a while, the first thing a trained stylist looks at isn't the top of the head. It's the nape. Because the nape tells you everything. It tells you how long ago the last cut was. It tells you whether the cut was properly structured, or just approximated. And it tells you immediately whether the overall style reads as polished or slightly neglected, even if every other part of the head looks completely fine. Here's the thing about the nape of a pixie. It's the one zone that grows out fastest and looks the most disheveled when it does. While the crown and sides might hold their shape for weeks, the nape can go from clean to visually cluttered in 10 days. Fine, soft hairs start to grow outward instead of lying flat. The line that used to close off the silhouette neatly starts to fuzz out. And because the nape is at the back of the head, fully visible to everyone standing behind you, fully visible in every over-the-shoulder photo, it quietly undermines the entire cut. Most women over 60 have never been told to specifically request a nape finish. They ask for a trim and assume it's covered. Sometimes it is. Sometimes the stylist focuses on the crown and the fringe, the parts the client can see, and the nape gets a general going over rather than a precise finish. The result is a cut that looks great in the mirror and slightly soft everywhere else. The fix is a blended soft nape taper. Not a hard undercut, not a razor-shaved nape. Those read as too severe and too modern for most women over 60, and they also grow out visibly fast, creating a gap between the clean-shaved zone and the grown-out hair above it. A soft taper blends the hair gradually from the body of the cut down to the skin. Shorter at the hairline, blending upward through the nape into the natural body of the cut above. You can't see a hard edge because there is no hard edge. You just see a silhouette that closes cleanly and sits flat. To ask for this specifically, say, I want a soft blended taper at the nape, not a hard undercut, just a clean blend down to the skin. Any experienced stylist will know exactly what you mean. If you're somewhere new and not sure, ask them to show you the difference between an undercut and a blended taper before they start. The conversation takes 30 seconds, and it guarantees you get what you're asking for rather than what the stylist defaults to. The visual payoff for a clean nape finish is disproportionate to how simple it is. Everything above it, the crown, the sides, the fringe, suddenly reads more intentional, more finished. The whole silhouette closes with a purpose. Women who've never paid attention to the nape until their stylist pointed it out describe the change the same way every time. I can't believe how much cleaner everything looks. It's not just the nape. It's what the nape says about the rest of the cut. There's also a practical maintenance note here. The nape is the one zone where a little between appointment upkeep is both possible and worth it. A small pair of styling scissors or a discreet trimmer can clean up the very edge of the nape every 10 to 12 days without touching the body of the cut at all. You're not trimming. You're just keeping the hairline flat. A stylist will show you the exact line to follow the first time you ask. Crown, fringe, nape, 3 zones that work as a team. But there's a 4th layer to this cut that has nothing to do with length or shape. It's the texture of the hair itself, and how the cut is handling, or mishandling, it. For fine or thinning hair, this is where the whole Pixie can quietly go wrong in a way that no amount of fixing the shape will correct. 4. The texture trap. What's flattening your Pixie without you knowing? Here's something that doesn't get said enough. Most of the thinning hair techniques used in standard salon Pixie cuts are designed for women in their 30s and 40s. They were developed for denser, younger hair that can afford to lose some bulk without going flat. After 60, when the hair is finer, lighter in density, and more fragile at the shaft, those same techniques often work directly against the cut instead of with it. The most common example is thinning shears. Thinning shears are the go-to tool for removing bulk from a dense Pixie, and they do exactly that. They cut every other strand throughout a section, reducing volume fast. On fine hair over 60, they reduce what's already reduced. The hair looks thinner at the cut line, the ends lose integrity, and because fine hair doesn't have the density to hold the space left by the missing strands, the whole section collapses and lies flat. You came in with fine hair, and you're leaving with fine hair that's also now flat. The razor is slightly better, but still problematic for very fine hair. A razor slice removes bulk while creating a feathered edge, which sounds like it should add texture. And it does, on hair with enough density to hold the feathered ends apart. On very fine hair, the feathered ends are so lightweight that they collapse into each other rather than fanning out, and you end up with a section that looks thin rather than textured. The correct technique for fine or thinning hair on a Pixie cut is point cutting. Not just point cutting at the ends, point cutting throughout the cut. A stylist who point cuts your Pixie is holding the shears vertically, or at a steep diagonal, and cutting into the hair rather than across it. This creates a disconnected, irregular edge within the section rather than a clean, blunt line. Here's the key difference. Point cutting doesn't remove strands. It creates breaks in the surface of the hair that give each section movement and lift without taking away any actual volume. The strand count stays the same. The visual texture changes completely. Pair point cutting with root lift spray, and you have the complete answer to a flat Pixie. Root lift spray is applied before blow drying directly at the roots, specifically at the crown, while the hair is still damp. It coats the hair shaft at the base and holds it slightly away from the scalp as it dries. It's not hairspray. It's not mousse. It doesn't add crunch or stiffness. It adds structural support exactly where the weight of the hair is pulling it down. On a Pixie cut, a dime-sized amount of root lift spray worked through the crown roots before drying is the difference between a cut that holds its shape all morning and one that's flat by 10 o'clock. The snapback from this combination, point cut texture throughout the crown and root lift spray before drying, is visible in the mirror immediately. The crown sits up. The light catches the sections differently because the hair has enough movement to shift rather than lying in one flat sheet. The whole head reads fuller without being fuller. It's entirely structural. Women who've made this switch describe it as the thing they wish their stylist had told them the very first time they asked for a Pixie. To ask for this at your next appointment, say, "I have fine hair and I want the crown point cut throughout. Not thinning shears, not a razor. just point cutting. Bring it up at the consultation, not after the cut has started. Stylists who hear it before they pick up the shears have time to adjust their whole approach. Stylists who hear it halfway through are correcting rather than planning, which is a different thing entirely. The structure of the cut is sorted. The texture is working. But there's one more layer on top of all of it, literally, and it's the color. Because you can have a perfect pixie cut with beautiful point cut texture and a clean nape and a lovely curtain fringe, and then choose the wrong color and quietly undo all of it. This is the mistake that nobody associates with aging, until they suddenly see it in a photograph. 5. The color that hardens your face. Why dark or stark shades backfire on a pixie. Here's a strange truth about hair color at 60 plus. A shade that looked dramatic and sophisticated in your 40s can read as a completely different thing now. Not because your taste changed, because your face did. The light that reflects off your hair, the contrast it creates against your skin, the way it frames every feature. All of that interacts with the current version of your face, not the one that wore that same color 20 years ago. And on a pixie cut, which sits immediately at the face with nowhere to soften or transition, that interaction is completely unfiltered. The most common version of this mistake is a solid, flat dark color on a pixie. Women choose it thinking it reads as bold and intentional, and in theory it should. In practice, on mature skin over 60, a flat dark shade that's applied evenly from root to tip tends to flatten the skin tone rather than contrasting with it. The harshness of the dark against the lighter, softer tones of mature skin and lighter eye color creates a sharpness that reads as severe rather than striking. Stylists describe it privately as a cut that looks like it's wearing its color rather than the woman wearing her cut. On the other end of the mistake, there's the color that's too stark in the other direction. A solid, very cool or ashy silver on mature skin that sits cool or slightly sallow. Silver is often beautiful on a pixie over 60, but not every silver works for every skin tone. A flat, uniformly cool silver can pull out the gray undertones in mature skin and read as washing the face out rather than framing it. The cut disappears into the background because there's nothing warm to anchor the eye. The fix begins with the concept of warmth and a specific product, a warm pearl toning gloss. This is not a permanent color. It's a semi-permanent treatment, usually processed in 10 to 15 minutes over existing color or natural silver. That adds a subtle warm tone throughout the hair. Warm pearl describes the undertone. Not golden warm, not brassy warm, a soft neutral warm that sits between cool gray and warm blonde. On silver hair, it gives the color dimension. On dark hair being softened, it breaks up the flatness without adding obvious highlights. The second element is face framing lighter pieces. Even minimal ones, just a few slightly lighter strands at the temples and around the hairline, soften the point at which the hair meets the face. These aren't highlights in the classic sense, they're not bright bleached pieces. They're 1 to 2 shades lighter than the body of the cut at the very frame of the face. What they do is create a gradual transition between the hair and the skin rather than a hard edge. The face looks gently lit rather than sharply bracketed. Ask your colorist for face framing lighter pieces at the temples and a warm pearl toning gloss throughout. Those exact words work in any salon. A colorist who hasn't heard the term warm pearl will either recognize the concept or ask you a follow-up question. And either way, the conversation goes somewhere useful rather than you pointing at a magazine photo and hoping. The result of this combination on a pixie cut is something you can actually measure in before and after photos. The features soften. The skin looks warmer. The cut looks more intentional because it's no longer in competition with the color. The color is working with the cut rather than sitting on top of it. And women who've made this change consistently say the same thing. I didn't realize how harsh I looked until I saw what softer color did to my face. Color is cumulative. It builds in the right direction or it drifts in the wrong one, appointment by appointment. Getting it right once is a start, but keeping it right requires a maintenance rhythm. Which brings us directly to mistake 6, and a timing rule that most women with a pixie cut have never heard, but that stylists have been applying quietly for years. 6. The 5-week rule. Why your timeline is aging your pixie. Women with long hair can go 12 weeks between cuts and it reads as growing it out. Women with a pixie cut cannot. A pixie at 12 weeks is not a grown-out pixie. It is a different, worse haircut. And 6 weeks isn't much better. The shape of a well-done pixie starts its visible decline at 5 weeks, almost exactly, every time. This is something most stylists know and almost none of them say out loud. Not because they're hiding it, but because they don't want to sound like they're chasing appointments. But the structural reality of a pixie cut is that its shape is held by millimeters, not inches. The nape taper starts to fuzz at 5 weeks. The side pieces lose their feathered edge. The crown, which was holding its lift through point cutting and structure, starts to collapse slightly at the perimeter because the weight of the regrowth is pulling the foundation of the cut outward and down. At 5 weeks, the cut looks like it needs a trim. At 7 weeks, it looks like a different person's hair. At 10 or 12 weeks, it reads as someone who had a pixie once and hasn't been back to the salon. Most women with a pixie are on a 6 to 8 week schedule because that's what they transferred from their previous cut. A layered bob every 6 weeks was fine. The bob had enough length to absorb the growth and still look intentional. The pixie doesn't. The pixie has no length buffer. Every millimeter of growth is visible because there's nothing else in the cut to absorb or disguise it. The 5-week rule is simple. Book your next appointment before you leave the current one, and set it at 5 weeks from that day. Not 6, not 8, 5. This is not about going to the salon more often for the sake of it. It's about catching the cut at the exact point before the shape loses integrity, rather than after. A 5-week trim is always faster and cheaper than a 6 or 8 week correction, because at 5 weeks your stylist is maintaining a cut. At 7 weeks, they're partially rebuilding one. There's a practical conversation to have with your stylist that makes the 5-week rule even more manageable. The difference between a shape-up and a full trim. A full trim takes 20 to 30 minutes and addresses every zone of the cut: crown, sides, fringe, nape, everything. A shape-up takes 10 to 15 minutes and focuses only on the nape and sides, which are the first zones to lose definition. If cost or time is the barrier to a 5-week schedule, a shape-up on alternating appointments, full trim, shape-up, full trim, shape-up, keeps the cut inside its shape window for a lower time and cost commitment. Ask your stylist whether this works for your specific cut. Most will tell you honestly. Here's what the 5-week rule actually changes about the daily experience of having a pixie. Almost everything. A pixie maintained at 5 weeks holds its shape through a full week of washing, sleeping, and weather. A pixie at 7 or 8 weeks holds its shape for about 2 days before you're fighting it. That gap, 5 days of the cut working for you versus 2 days of the cut working for you, is the difference between a hairstyle that feels like a decision and a hairstyle that feels like a problem you're managing. Women who've switched to the 5-week schedule almost universally say the same thing. They expected to feel like they were going to the salon more, and they ended up feeling like they were going less, because every visit was shorter, easier, and the cut behaved better between visits. The mathematics of it surprised them. The experience of it didn't, once they understood why the cut works the way it does. One small, specific detail to add to every 5-week appointment. Ask your stylist to finish the nape with a little clear styling balm press flat before you leave. Just the nape, not the whole cut. This seals the fresh taper slightly and extends the clean appearance of the nape by 3 to 4 days before the fine hairs begin to grow outward again. It's a 30-second step at the end of the appointment, and it genuinely makes a visible difference to how long the fresh trim look holds. 5 weeks in the salon and the cut keeps doing its job. But there's one final mistake that happens entirely at home, every single morning, and it quietly undoes even the most perfectly maintained pixie within an hour of leaving the house. It's the last thing on this list, and it might be the one that surprises you most. 7. The morning mistake. Why your pixie falls flat before you leave the house. 90% of pixie cuts that don't hold are not actually bad cuts. They're well-cut pixies being dried in the wrong direction. That's it. That's the whole explanation. The shape that looked sharp and lifted when you left the salon disappears by 10 in the morning because the styling step that makes a pixie hold, directional blow drying, was either skipped, done wrong, or replaced with something that doesn't work for this specific cut. Most women with a pixie use one of 3 morning approaches. They diffuse it, they air dry it, or they scrunch and finger shape it until it looks acceptable. All 3 of these are perfectly reasonable techniques for other haircuts. For a pixie cut, all 3 produce the same result. A crown that lies flat, a fringe that falls instead of sweeps, and a cut that looks like it needs to be done again by the time you've made your second cup of tea. Hairstyle diffusing doesn't work for a pixie the way it works for longer styles. A diffuser distributes airflow in multiple directions simultaneously. It lifts and separates, which is exactly right for curly or wavy hair that needs to dry without being straightened. On a pixie, especially a fine-haired one, diffused airflow goes everywhere at once, which means it doesn't go anywhere specifically. The crown gets lifted in 5 different directions, and then settles into whichever one gravity prefers, which is almost always straight down. The fringe doesn't hold its sweep because nothing directed it into the sweep during drying. The result is a dry, finished-looking pixie that has no actual shape. Directional blow-drying means using a nozzle attachment, the narrow concentrator nozzle, not the diffuser, and pointing the airflow in the specific direction you want each section of the cut to end up. The crown is dried with the nozzle aimed forward, from the back of the crown toward the front hairline, while your fingers or a small round brush lift the roots slightly away from the scalp. You are not just drying the hair. You are telling it where to go while it's hot and movable, then holding it in that position until it cools. Hair that has been directionally dried, and then cooled in position holds that position for hours. Hair that was dried randomly, and then shaped with fingers afterward holds its shape for about 40 minutes. The specific sequence for a pixie is this. Apply root lift spray to the crown while the hair is still damp. Work it through the roots with your fingertips, not through the lengths, just the roots at the crown. Then, using the nozzle attachment, start at the nape. Dry the nape flat with the airflow aimed downward, pressing the nape hairs flat with your free hand as they dry. Move to the sides. Dry each side with the airflow aimed forward toward the face, so the side pieces sit swept toward the cheekbone rather than pushed back behind the ear. Then move to the crown. Lift at the root with your fingers. Aim the airflow from the back of the crown toward the front, and keep lifting until the section is fully dry. Finish with the fringe. Aim the nozzle in the direction of the sweep, guiding the fringe across the forehead as it dries. The whole process takes 4 to 5 minutes once it's become a habit. What changes after the first time you do this correctly is difficult to describe without sounding like an overstatement, but here it is. The cut looks like it was done that morning. Not styled from the day before, not managed with product, not shaped into something acceptable. Actually done. The crown holds height. The fringe holds its sweep. The sides sit where they were cut to sit. And because the shape was set during drying rather than after, it holds through the weather, through a brisk walk, through sitting with a window open. A pixie that has been directionally dried is a different cut from a pixie that was air-dried and then adjusted. They are genuinely not the same result, even on the same head of hair on the same day. One last thing about styling product on a pixie. Less is dramatically more. A small amount of light hold paste or styling cream worked through the crown after drying adds touchable texture, and a little hold without weight. The mistake is using mousse or heavy wax on fine hair. Both add weight that pulls the lift you just created back down. Light paste, light cream, nothing thick, nothing heavy. Finger it through the crown, leave the fringe and the sides clean unless they need a touch of definition, and you're done. 7 mistakes. 7 fixes. And every single one of them is in your hands. Not in the hands of whoever cut your hair last. Not locked inside some genetic reality about what your hair can or can't do. The pixie cut is one of the most powerful choices a woman over 60 can make for her hair. You just need to know how to wear it right. You now have everything you need to make your pixie cut work the way it was supposed to from the beginning. The right shape at the crown, the fringe that frames you instead of exposing you, the nape that closes the silhouette cleanly, the texture and color that soften rather than harden, the trim schedule that keeps the cut sharp, and the 4-minute morning routine that sets everything and holds it. Tell me in the comments. Which of these 7 mistakes have you been making without realizing it? I'd love to know which one surprised you most. Next week I'm covering the haircut decisions that age women over 60 the fastest, including one that almost every woman thinks is making her look younger and isn't. Like this video, subscribe to Timeless Wisdom Path, and I'll see you in the next one.